Welcome everyone to this special International Women's Day webinar from the VMA and our guests today, Helen Fairclough, Beckrow and Kath McCann. My name's Joel Edmondson. I'm the CEO of the Venue Management Association. I'd like to begin the webinar by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all meeting today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. It's kind of redundant to say that women are an incredibly important part of the venue management and events industry, and there are many ways its foundation, and it's very fitting that we kind of gather today to have this conversation. Before I hand over to Helen to host the event, and Helen Fairclough is one of our VMA board members. I do just want to highlight to everyone that VMA Congress is now on sale. Early bird finishes on the 10th of April. This year, the Congress is very, very focused on innovation and change leadership, and there will be many, many of our most exemplary female leaders from our sector, not only present at that event, but taking the stage. So I would love to see you all there, but without further ado, I'll hand over to Helen.
Thanks, Joel. So as Joel mentioned, I'm Helen Fairclough, Non-Executive Director of the Venue Management Board and former Chief Operating Officer of the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre. I've been given the honour of participating in today's International Women's Day event on behalf of the Venue Management Association Australia, Asia Pacific. And I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. I acknowledge that we're hosting today's event from the lands of the saltwater Bunurong Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, whose lands and waters we recognise the significance of. And personally, I thank them for sharing the land which I live, work and learn on, and pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and to all First Nations people participating in this event today, and elders of all First Nations communities from the lands wherever you may be joining today's event. So in celebration of International Women's Day today, we're going to be exploring the barriers women face in leadership, their distinct leadership styles, and impact of women leaders in the sports and venue industry. And just by way of a little background, this year's International Women's Day theme is Accelerate Action. And that's really a wide call to acknowledge strategies, resources and activity that positively impact women's advancement to support and elevate their implementation, because at the current rate of progress, it'll take until 2158, which is roughly 5 generations from now, to reach full gender parity, which is obviously rather disappointing. And that's data from the World Economic Forum. In addition to Accelerate Action, the United Nations Women Australia announced their theme specifically for Australia of March Forward, to commemorate 30 years since the UN Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, which really emphasises the importance of continued progress and reflection on past achievements to drive future actions. The theme calls for action that can unlock equal rights, power and opportunities for all, with really the central vision being about empowering the next generation. As I mentioned earlier, we have some challenges. So despite the progress made, current stats show persistent challenges across areas like economic empowerment, leadership, to media representation and climate justice, much of which we'll explore today and are outlined in that UN Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. So let's get started. I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome and introduce our panel members today. Firstly, we have Kathryn or Kath McCann, the General Manager of Marketing, Public Affairs and Social Impact at Tasmanian Football Club. Kath has senior executive experience across the public, private and not-for-profit sectors. She's currently Executive Director of Tasmanian Football Club, where she's working full-time to guide the organisation through their establishment phase. And Kath continues to hold a range of board positions. She's currently Non-Executive Director of Tasmania Development Board and Bank of Us, and recently retired as the Chair of the Royal Tasmanian Botanical Gardens. Kath grew up and was educated in Tasmania, so sort of homebred, true Tassie, leading the team, which is fabulous, and is a graduate of the University of Tasmania, where she completed a double degree with majors in psychology and marketing. Kath's the proud wife of Adam and mum of Oscar and Harriet, and is passionate about building up women and young people to be the best versions of themselves, and loves nothing more than being in nature and exercising. Thanks and welcome, Kath. And in addition, we have Rebecca or Beck Rowe. Beck is the Event Oversight Director at World Rugby, a seasoned event manager with extensive experience in the sports industry, specialising in event management, corporate events, sponsorship and sports management. She holds a Bachelor of Commerce in Sales and Marketing from Curtin University of Technology, with a strong background across multiple sporting codes. Rebecca's passionate about sports presentation and seamless event delivery, known for her meticulous attention to detail, strategic planning, and ability to solve problems under pressure. I'm sure you've had a few of those. She thrives in dynamic environments where adaptability is key, and her commitment to excellence ensures that every event she manages is executed with precision, creating memorable experiences for stakeholders and audiences alike. So thank you. I'd like to get started and perhaps explore some of the experience that these fabulous women have and share that with you all. So let's kind of start with the current state of play. So nationally, women make up just 22% of CEOs, 37% of key management personnel, and 42% of managers in Australia. So I'm really interested to understand from both of you, Kath and Beck, what barriers you might have faced when building your careers, as you've sort of got to those various stages. So who'd like to start?
I'm happy to start, Helen. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to come on to the webinar today, and thanks to VMA for having me, and to Helen and Beck and to Joel. I appreciate it. It is a real privilege to be here, to be able to talk with obviously a range of people from across Australia interested in this topic. In terms of my experience and some of the barriers, and I'm new to the sports industry. I have worked in the events industry with a long history with tourism and hospitality, particularly in entertainment. So VMA and the work of VMA is something that's quite close to my heart, and particularly the number of women that we see in operational roles in the events sector more broadly. Women play such an important role in this industry. In terms of some of the, I guess, challenges or barriers that I've experienced, the first one I'd just like to reference is, in order to really progress in your career, the opportunities to gain experience. So in order to obviously move up ladders, if we look at it from a hierarchical perspective, often you do need experience, and opening those doors to get experience, particularly in different areas of operations, in order to be able to take on, more broader or more senior responsibilities. At times that has been a challenge, and what you really do need, and I think many would concur, is having great leaders around you that are really prepared to open those doors and give you a leg up, but also the need for you to be pushing yourself forward to gain those opportunities, because they will obviously place you well as you look to further your career. Probably the second thing that I would touch on is more of internal challenge or barrier, and that is self-belief. I think there is a real correlation, particularly with women, in role modelling, and if we can't be what we can't see, in so much that there are not a lot of women in those senior roles, the opportunity, can somewhat be, if you like, a little bit overwhelming, and being able to have self-belief that you can take that next step. You haven't necessarily got an abundance of particularly female role models. So making sure that you can develop strategies for yourself to believe that you can take that next step, and importantly, surrounding yourself with people that do believe in you as well. I think that's really, really important. The third piece for me is around balance. I'm a mum, so I had my first child at 24 years of age, and balancing, I think, particularly as a woman in the workforce, if you do have a family, returning to work, and then the pressures that come with being a parent, and what that looks like, and finding the right balance. I think we would all agree that there's a fusion between work and home, particularly in these kinds of roles, and the events industry. It's quite pervasive in terms of, the hours that are worked and how it bridges into personal life. But making sure that you've got strategies to balance, and we'll talk a little bit more later in the session in respect to advice. But one thing that I learned early in my career is that, particularly as a woman, you can have everything in life but not at once, and so making sure that you can really make trade-offs as you journey through those different responsibilities, to be comfortable with your own balance, is something that's really important. But also making sure that you're working in an environment with supportive leadership that are prepared to allow that and allow your decisions. And the last thing I just wanted to mention around barriers is particularly in the football industry. So AFL as an industry has been dominated by men by over 100 years. It's been played by men. It's been coached by men. It's been reported by men. It's been managed by men. And that's not a bad thing. It's just that literally the heritage and the history of the game. But what that means is that it's quite a big change for everyone involved in the game around the introduction of women, and nothing could be more advantageous than the role of the AFLW and the sport, and women being able to see themselves in the industry. So that has a lot of benefits, and no doubt we'll talk more about that. But I think as a barrier, sometimes, I think if you can't what you can't see and you haven't got those role models, that can be somewhat daunting. But there are plenty of great men out there as well that are prepared to support and encourage and facilitate. And I guess the one key thing for me as I've journeyed through my career is making sure that I'm working for people and organisations that my values and my purpose aligns. And ultimately, if you put yourself in the right place, doing the right things, opportunity should present.
Thank you. Great advice.
Kathryn, I suppose a couple of things you pointed on there, and it's interesting because I guess you've landed into the AFL world now. And just for me, personally, I started my career in the AFL world. I got thrust into the local AFL team here in WA as an event coordinator. And as Kath said, I stepped in at a time where it was very heavily male. I mean, at that point in time, AFLW didn't exist. So for nearly 10 years of my career at West Coast, we didn't have a female team. So, our men's team were our pinnacle, and they were everything that everyone in that organisation were working for. And now I would never say that a barrier for me around leadership was seeing a lot of men around, because I was really lucky that a lot of the men, and some of them are still very much there at West Coast in those senior leadership roles, were incredible for me to look up to. I think if I think about it as a barrier, it was almost myself not seeing the role that I had as a leader. Just because I wasn't in the senior management group or on the executive board, the role I had within my events team, I actually was a leader, and trying to make sure I realised that at my level, so that then I could see myself progressing further. And, there's nothing more humbling than standing in front of a team of 44 men, well, some of them were men, some of them quite young, leading as they get recruited, but standing boldly in front of a group of men to, brief them on a community camp or an event, I really found that I had to take hold of realising that, right, they're used to seeing this male coach stand up, and I needed to come and present in a similar way. And the way I managed to do that was just coming in with confidence, but also knowledge, and not coming in unprepared or, shaking in my boots, because I knew I was there for a reason. So I never saw it as a barrier. I more so saw it as an opportunity to look at what the men around me were doing and see how I could do the same within my own role. I think one of the things as I've moved into my career, and Kath mentioned it, was around, the balance of family life. Similar to Kath, I've got 2 children. And for me, I had a 9-year gap between the 2 kids. And so, I was heading into a really phase, ones at school, and life's a bit easier. And then all of a sudden, surprise, I had another little one coming along. And that was a real struggle for me at the time, because I was at a point in my career where I felt I was ready to take on that senior management role. And I was really nervous that, making that announcement that I was, pregnant and having a baby would change my direction. And I was really lucky that I was in a position at now a rugby club where it didn't change that. I managed to, get a promotion whilst I was pregnant, to then be able to come back to once I finished my maternity leave. So as much as being the mum and having a family can sometimes be seen as a barrier, I think we need to help ourselves remove that as a barrier and realise that we have our worth, and, coming back into the role is possible. And, we should back ourselves as much as we can in that. So, yeah, there's a couple to note.
Thank you. Great examples, and I think sharing how you've navigated it. Sounds like you've both had your fair share of challenges along the way. Beck, just kind of building on what you were talking about, I'm interested to hear a little bit more of your personal insights on perhaps any other specific leadership challenges you might have navigated, and if you've got any stories there that you might want to share.
Yeah, for sure. As I just mentioned then, I was in my career working at a super rugby club here in WA when I guess I could see and was, spoken to about an opportunity moving forward for me to step into a senior management role. And I think at first the biggest challenge for me when that was presented was my own self-belief. If I look at it in its most simplest point of view, I didn't see how someone else could be seeing in me that I could, take on that role. And I really had to go away, look at it and speak to the people that I lean on in my life from a mentoring point of view, whether they're people I've worked with or I've come across within my career at the events or the venues I work at, and hearing them saying, absolutely, of course, that's a no-brainer, like that you are the right person for that role. And without that support of those mentors, I probably would have kept not disbelieving that I'd be able to take it on. But, with great pride, I did move into the senior leadership group at the club. And I think the biggest challenge, and, it's probably quite a similar experience to maybe some of the women on this call, but I was the only woman in that room. And at times I could have felt overpowered by the very strong 6 male voices in the room that perhaps I felt had more stronger experience specifically within the sport as well. I had moved into a new industry, but I was really strong in my experience of the group that I was working with, but I didn't feel I had that strong enough experience within the actual core sport I was working in. And for a while, that really threw me off, and I didn't walk into those weekly meetings with as much confidence as I probably should have. And I had to realize why. And as long as I took the time to prepare, I changed my strategic thinking about how I would present in those meetings. I'm usually quite a talker, so I'm quite easy within a communication round to fire back and forward, but I felt sometimes I would get lost in those discussions if I really truly hadn't prepared my point of view and my reasoning and my understanding behind it. So that was a challenge for me, but it was something I learned quite quickly because it was a fast moving beast at the time where we were at in the club's, position. So I really needed to make sure that I was prepared. And I think when you get a role, a leadership role within an industry and with a specific role you are passionate about, experienced in, there should be no reason why you doubt yourself, because if you can talk with passion about what you love to do, no matter where you are, whether, as I said, back where I started dealing with my little events team with 2 people compared to working with a wider team and reporting through to the CEO, believe in yourself, I think, was the biggest challenge for me.
Yeah, and it sounds like that the mentoring played a really big role in helping sort of that positive feedback to you that, you absolutely should be in this position.
And I can, sorry for Helen, I'll just mention, I will say that did come quite strongly from a lot of men around me as well, which is really nice. I mean, I did have some great female leaders around me that I could talk to, but I think in a strange way, once again, because I was in such a male-dominated space at that point in time, the men that I did truly trust and those ones that did really lift me up and push me forward was just as supportive.
Yeah, I think it's important to say the mentors can be found in all different places and different genders, and that's great. So on the topic of mentoring, I'm really I certainly take any opportunity I can to mentor. I've had some experience on the board of the Victorian Chamber of Commerce, where we have a chamber change program for women in business, and I mentor about 28 women in that forum. Personally participate in mentoring, and I know that the Venue Management Association have a really active mentoring program, but I'd be really interested to hear from both of you on how you've personally supported and mentored other women in the industry. Perhaps we'll start with you, Kath.
Yeah, thank you. 28 women, Helen. That's fantastic. It's a very generous thing to do, and well done. Thank you. I think the stats show clearly, and Helen spoke about the stats earlier in this presentation, that we do have a responsibility to really help the next generation, and that's something, my personal purpose, and a legacy I wish to leave is to ensure that we're finding opportunities to do that. The thing that I would say is that we can find formal and informal ways to mentor. So, and it doesn't need to be, use the terminology mentoring sometimes feels like a big leap. It can just be catching up for a coffee. And I always say sometimes a problem shared is a problem halved. So if you've got an opportunity to chat to someone, that always helps you when you're navigating through your career. I've had a number of doors open for me along the way. And so I do feel probably like Helen and no doubt Beck, a personal responsibility to help the next generation in terms of doors opening. So I've been involved in a number of formal mentoring programs. We've got a really great program here with the University of Tasmania, and most universities would have those programs. So something for people to look up in their local jurisdictions. I'm sure there's opportunity there. I also participate in a program here in Tasmania, which sits nationally, called Mentor Walks. It's a great program where you go along, and I get assigned a number of mentees. I always learn more from them, I'm sure, than they learn from me. But we get to go for a walk together, which I find is a really good way to get conversation flowing. And it's an opportunity, out in the fresh air, to just have a yarn about some specific questions or matters that you might just want to run by someone else. We've also at the Tassie Footy Club just established a Tasmanian Academy of Leadership and Sport, and I think some of our students are actually on this call. And I've got an opportunity to engage with those students. And I think the key thing from my perspective, and I'd say this through the eyes of mentor and mentee, because I expect that we've probably got people on this call that are, looking at it from both sides, if you like, is firstly, it's as valuable to the mentor as it is to the mentee to engage in conversations. So don't ever hesitate to reach out to someone and ask them for a chat. People generally love to help. But put your hand up. The worst thing that can possibly happen is they might say no or not yet. And surely you'll find another time, or you'll build your confidence to ask someone else. From a mentor perspective, a really big focus of mine, and I know it's hard for some of us, our diaries are full, our days are hectic, but I think it's really important that we are accessible, particularly to women, just to sit and have a yarn. And sometimes, as I say, a problem shared is a problem halved. I know I've repeated that, but, it's really likely that what you're experiencing, others are experiencing or have experienced. And sometimes just knowing that it's not an isolated experience, and that others might be able to, usually, in a mentor relationship, probably the mentor will just throw a few questions back to you and you'll probably solve the problem yourself. So I think that's really important to recognise, do reach out. And for those on the other side of the ledger, if you like, make yourself accessible, because you never know what change you can create for someone just by even giving them your time and showing a bit of belief in someone else. It can really help them on their trajectory. But I think the most important thing, Helen, is for those on this call is when you think about mentoring, don't be daunted by the terminology or the formality of how that might sound. There's many ways to engage in conversations, and I'm sure there's many women, but also I've had, and still to this day, I have got some outstanding men in my corner, and men that I've been able to turn to and talk to, and, forget about the gen piece, just think about great leaders. People that are prepared to lend a hand and, not just give you advice, but usually, as I say, ask you some questions and you'll be able to navigate it through yourself. So if you're not having those conversations, I'd really suggest, jump off this call, maybe jot down a few names of people that, you think could be great to have a chat to, and be brave, reach out. And what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah, I totally agree. I actually had that same conversation with someone at the chamber and said, just ask them for coffee, because signing them up for a mentor program sounds intense and, maybe a bit too formal. Just start with a coffee and make that. And people do want to help, so I agree. What about yourself, Beck? Have you had any involvement in mentoring?
Yeah, I am similar to Kath. I mean, I think I've found my way through my career, starting in a work experience situation at a club, and I've found people there that have then, naturally become someone that I've looked up to, and then they've, led me to certain opportunities around, throughout the years. And I think I'm really big on making sure I do the same for people that I come across in my career. And that's not only people that I either employ into my own team or within the organisation or come across in the different, venues or stakeholders or suppliers that I, meet. I think, and specifically talking about sport, because this is the world that I've lived in for many years, and especially male-dominated sports where the core team are male, it can be quite, I find a lot of value where I can offer, especially the new people walking into those roles, is looking at how they can feel confidence in exactly what I said before, standing in front of a room in front of 44 men who are not there to attend an event or happily run off to a community camp or do player appearances. They want to do their core role, which is, train hard and perform on field, but really sharing the knowledge to people to say, right, we've got to find the balance and give them the time of day. But if you go in there prepared, don't waste their time. Show them that you know what you're doing. You will then get their respect back quickly, and then at least you'll be able to walk through that office or that gym or that change room a lot easier than you would have without some of those things. So I make it a real point, and especially when people step into new roles within footy clubs and rugby clubs, wherever I've been, it's really important for the females to understand how they can approach those situations. So like what Cass said, I've got many that I still catch up with. And as I said, it's really informal. To start with, it was like, a once a month thing. Now it's just, I'll hear from them when they're finding a new role and they don't know if they want to do it or if they need someone to help, as a reference, and or I need a change. I don't know where I want to go. And like Cass said, I get more out of them sometimes. Because then as I start to talk, I go, oh, that was a really good point. Like that's something that I've never really noticed that I do. They go, oh, but when you do this, you come across as, the boss lady. And I'm like, really? Like in my own mind, I don't see myself as that. I'm just talking as if I'm doing what I do. So it's quite nice to hear other people's opinions coming back at you from a mentee point of view.
Yeah, it is, isn't it, when you don't really realise how you come across. So, but thank you for sharing that. So I think, Kath, you mentioned earlier on in the chat about, how important it is to have women at the table in leadership and the role they play in sports and venue management. I just really like to hear a bit more from you on what your thoughts are on sort of leadership styles and traits of women, and how you see that our approach brings something different to the table in our space.
Yeah, well, thanks, Helen. I think I'd start with the basis of diversity gets better results. It's proven. So there's evidence, global evidence, and not just in terms of organisational culture and organisational satisfaction, but commercial, financial results. It's clearly evidenced. And when we talk about diversity, yes, we talk about gender, but different styles of thinking. I think everyone would agree that the more we're able to work in diverse teams where we're able to respectfully and safely challenge and create, great perspectives that allow us to push and, really challenge our own thoughts. My experience in my career, time and time again, is that you get better results. So, and it can feel at times, we like to generally recruit people like us. I think a lot of us would agree, and sometimes you can find yourselves in a bit of a groupthink kind of situation. We do actually need to find ways within our environments to really challenge that by bringing in, diversity in. Clearly, gender is a pretty straightforward one that we should be able to tick off on. In terms of leadership styles of women, I think we do bring different perspectives to the table, but we also bring different stylistic elements that I think are really beneficial, and we should actually lean into those. I think, for those on this call, and particularly if you feel like, you're entering a man's world, if you like, I don't really like language like that, but if you feel like you're in an environment where it is male dominated, my advice and encouragement is you need to be you. Because trying to then imitate behaviours and, if you like, leadership traits or characteristics of those around you, that's actually not the best version of yourself, likely, but it's also probably not going to get the best result for the team. So obviously you need to be confident though, and you need to be safe in order to be able to do that. But I think, the characteristics and traits that women bring, particularly around, I think, empathy, collaboration, I think they're really, really important. I think women work really well in team environments in terms of working together. A lot of the women that I've worked with too, and it's not to say men not, but women have a particular tendency, and I'd say very much so for a lot of venue and event employees, is around getting things done. So really organised and logistically really locked in and switched on to delivering. And we see a lot of women in event coordination and event management. I think we're very, very strong in that space. So I think lean into the characteristics and traits that you do demonstrate, because they're important that those are brought to the table. Because to circle back to what I said at the start, it's clearly evidence that having these different traits and characteristics out around the table will get better results. So sometimes I know that might feel difficult because there might be a situation where everyone's behaving in a similar way. But if you can bring difference to the table and influence with difference, it's going to have an absolute positive impact on the organisation you're working in.
Yeah, thank you. And it's interesting because I think you're right about cognitive diversity, not just visible diversity. So the way that people think and all of that, backgrounds, it's invaluable in bringing different perspectives to the table. So obviously we talked about some of the traits there, empathy and others that we have, really the importance of women in the industry. So some stats I was seeing recently said that in Australian media, disappointingly, women account for less than half of our bylines in the media, so 43%, I believe. Men feature disproportionately, with 70% of the men being the quoted source, or the 66% of those quoted are experts. So we also recently had some disparaging remarks on radio in respect to the Matildas that some of you may be aware of. And I just think there's so many of our headlines relating to sport, players, industry, venue management. I'm interested in your thoughts on the importance of kind of balancing that message and making sure women are represented in that space. So Kath, could you talk to me? I imagine with the AFL, that's an interesting space. And so I'd really be interested in your thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. The Tasmania Devils Football Club, we're the 19th licence of the AFL. For those online, we're due to enter the league sort of 2027 for our women and 2028 for the men. Now, that in itself is extraordinary. And as I mentioned earlier, the AFL industry is an industry that has been a male product. And we've got this amazing opportunity to bring women. Potentially women will play first for our club. And what that means in terms of inclusivity and equity, but also the culture of the club is an opportunity that's certainly not lost on us. It was only last week that our team undertook a session actually with Our Watch talking about gender inequality and the link from obviously gender inequality to violence against women. And the reason we're embarking on those conversations is with a really clear understanding about the opportunity that we have as a club to present men and women, boys and girls as equals from the start. And it is really important. And we had a discussion just in that session actually in respect to the fact that when the Matildas in Australia for the World Cup, we all remember that was just such an amazing moment in Australian sporting history. And I think the merch sales and the viewership numbers and everything reflected that. But probably at that time, we felt that there was just so much media about women in sport. And there was, but it still wasn't even at parity. The analysis has actually been done around that time. So it just shows how cued in we are around thinking about what we see. And, if you go and look at magazines, you go through newspapers, you have a look at electronic communications, digital media, you can literally count more photos of men than women. So we've got a responsibility as leaders, and certainly we have an opportunity at the Tasmanian Devils, the footy club, to really ensure that we are presenting men and women in a really positive manner, but also equally. Because, as I said earlier, you can't be what you can't see, and particularly for our youngsters coming through, and our young girls particularly, seeing role models that are female is certainly something that should be happening and is an opportunity. That's not to say they shouldn't be seeing males as well, but they should be seeing both in equal measures. So I do feel quite passionate about that. The one thing that I would say though, and we've experienced this and we will, is in doing that, preparing for backlash. Because what you're actually, you're challenging systematic norms around equality. And, we've got I feel we have a responsibility to challenge that. But you are likely to get backlash and there'll be incidents and there'll be issues that present. And within organisations, and particularly within our organisation, is making sure that our staff are well planned and prepared for that, because obviously a lot of this discourse does happen in the world of social media now, and unfortunately you can probably forecast that it will happen. There will be disparaging comments and there will be issues that you need to deal with. So I guess the one piece of advice that I'd have for everyone on this call, if you're starting to think about this space, which I really hope that you do, that you're actually preparing for it, not if, but when it happens, and make sure your organisation is, really well prepared and your staff are safe and able to manage through that. So I think, the Tassie Devils story is an amazing opportunity. And not all clubs are in that same position. Many clubs around different codes across Australia. It's not the case for Beck, but they are introducing women as a later addition. And that comes with a massive cultural change, not just internally in the club, but your fan base and the community more broadly. So, we've got a responsibility, we've got an obligation, but we've also got a tremendous opportunity working in this industry. But it's not going to be easy. We talked about the stats at the start and the pace of change. So how do we make sure that we, really realise that opportunity, but also protect our people as we go on that journey? Because, as I said, we're dealing with broad system mindsets in many instances, and sometimes that can be really tough and really tricky, and we need to navigate that through that carefully. But it shouldn't be the reason not to do it, in my view.
Totally agree. Thank you. Before we get to our last question, I just wanted to remind everyone we have a little Q&A segment at the end. So you'll see at the bottom of your screens there's a sort of Q&A speech box with a question mark in it. If you've got any questions, please start popping them in there now. And following this last question, then we'll actually get to those, and I'll open the floor and we can have a bit of a chat, because you've got these two incredible women here, and it's a great opportunity to put any of those questions out there. So I'd encourage you to just pop into that Q&A box and get your questions in. But so just shifting focus here a little, I want to talk about sort of inspiration and empowerment, and maybe perhaps this is something, Beck, you could help me with in terms of what advice you would give to women who are striving to stay true to their passion, but they may have to overcome some challenges in the process, and what steps can they take to create opportunities for themselves and the next generation?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and I've mentioned it already, I think the easiest way forward and the easiest way I found it moving forward through to my, leadership journey was staying true to my core passion of what I love to do in my job. And I think, starting where I did at such a strong organisation and moving through to where I am now with World Rugby, I'm really proud that I'm in an organisation that, that gender parity on the field is great. And with the Sevens tour that we work on, really happy that, the men's teams and the women's team all travel 12 around the world each, and, the prize money is equal, and no one has the opportunity to not talk about the women when they're talking about the men when it comes to our Sevens. And that's something that I think, similarly, the passion that these players have, and they deserve just as much equality for what they're doing. I think a really great example of this, in my field is a player called Alona Ma. She is an American rugby player. She's a Sevens rugby player. She's incredible at what she does. Her passion is to play rugby, but she has never once stepped away from who she is as a person. And I think, Kath, you even said this before, be you. And she's done that from the moment she's been on that field. And 5 years ago, you wouldn't have known her name. And she's built herself. She headed into the Paris Olympics and just blew up. She's now, taken over, headed into 15s rugby, but has just become one of the most followed. I think she is the most followed rugby player in the world, because she's just stayed true to who she is. Her passion is rugby, and she's willing to explore that, but also show who she is as a person. So I would like to say, I don't think it's bad for any of us in any of our organisations to do exactly that, show a bit of your personality while you're being it, and don't feel you have to be like everyone else in these leadership roles. I feel, looking at leadership styles and collaborative is sort of where I go. I often find I get into these meetings and I boldly make this like announcement or decision, and then I always end it with, but, I'm really open to hearing what you all think, or if anyone has any difference. Now, I'm okay with that, because I actually do want that. I want that discussion. Whereas I know that at times I've had people sort of come to me and go, Just, you've made the decision, stick with it. And I was like, yeah, but that's not who I am, because I may say the paper is white, but you may go, actually, it's a little bit off, and let's talk it through. And then we end up getting to where we're all in agreement. So your passion is why you're there in the first place, and do that well and show who you are. I don't think being anything but that and being who you are, trying to reflect others in their leadership roles, is never going to serve you well until you truly believe in the way that you're presenting and managing, your team and upwards as well.
Yeah, I'm certainly a big believer in authenticity and that kind of following that North Star. So couldn't agree more. We've got a couple of questions actually. So I think that's timely. I thank you both for, the barrage of questions I've been throwing at you and all your incredible insights and stories. But I'd like to perhaps throw to some of those that we've got coming in. And this one's probably a nice segue actually from your last comments, Beck. What approach do you recommend for the non-binary community in the workplace? Let's take that one.
Interesting. I mean, I think similar to what I just said, stay true to who you are. I think we're really lucky that we're coming, and the next generation specifically, as I talk about my children, they don't see any difference. The way they talk is the way we should be talking now, but it's not how we grew up. So it's okay that that's not how we grew up, but it's okay to change our perspective. And I think within organizations, and I, for a period of time, I worked in an organization where women didn't go into the men's spaces. You weren't allowed down in certain areas. But I think that freedom of people being who they are, true to who they are, is only going to serve our organizations better, because no one needs to pretend, and no one should not be taking an opportunity because they are, true to who they are. So I think it's more of an opportunity than we see, and I'm excited that the next generations will come with a fresher opinion and view than what perhaps our generations and the ones before us have had.
That's so true. And Kath, do you have anything you wanted to?
Yeah, Helen, I'm happy to add. Despite being on a International Women's Day event today, I think, and it's always International Women's Day, it's probably filled with emotions for many of us around, how we present and the discussion. I think a lot of my comments are totally gender irrelevant. And I'd say the same around how you identify. It's, certainly what I've discussed, I think it doesn't actually matter. The one thing I would say, though, and importantly, is, if you do identify differently, is making sure that you're working in a safe organisational culture that allows you to be who you are. And if it's not, then it might not be the right place, because it's incredibly important that everyone is allowed to be true to who they are, but not at an expense of safety. So that would be my only comment. And I always say, it is hard to particularly leave workplaces, particularly if you've got obligations, but you should always put your own safety and well-being first. And if culture's not right, to be brave enough to be able to leave and find an environment that's going to, really welcome you and encourage you and grow and allow you to grow and lead authentically. So that would be my comments there.
We have another question from Brendan Elmer. What's been the biggest challenge you faced as women in this industry, and how did you overcome it? I know we spoke to a few of those at the beginning, but maybe something very industry specific. I think this is coming out.
I'm happy to lead off on that one. For me, coming into the industry, I haven't had any operational experience in footy. So, and I think, particularly around leadership, real credibility comes from having operational experience, and Beck's probably had a lot more of that than I have. So I think that's been it's probably a barrier of my understanding, and an area where I'd love to learn more. But I guess the opportunity is creating that opportunity to learn more about the operational side of football, but also surrounding yourself with great people that are prepared to share with you and involve and engage. And I'm really fortunate with the leadership that I work with and for. that are more than happy to provide those opportunities. But, you know, like going into any new industry or any new job, there are going to be areas and barriers that you don't know and understand. And I think particularly understanding the operation is a key one. But as I said, I've been really blessed by those doors being open for me.
Yeah, it's interesting because similarly, I had that experience coming from people and culture, which is traditionally a female domain, into operations, and literally just kind of put on the uniform and went and did all the shifts to figure it out, because I think that there is, whether we like it or not, an element of credibility, even though your leadership skills are really what you're there for. So interesting dilemma. But yeah, thank you for that advice and guidance. I think what we might do now is, unless we have any more questions, we're coming up to time, but I think before I close out the session, we're really fortunate, I think, to have this time with both of you today, and you know, the audience being able to sort of throw questions your way. I've got one that I wanted to just sort of sneak in, and it's really a piece of advice that you'd leave us with that supports kind of the global theme of accelerate action and this march forward that we were talking about earlier for Australia, where we need to continue progress but reflect on the past. What's the one piece of advice or the few words of advice that you'd leave us with today? So I'll start with you, Beck.
Thanks, Helen. And first of all, before I close, I guess I also wanted to thank everyone for joining us today, wherever you are in the country, whether you've been early or you're heading into lunch. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to us have a little chat. I guess, you know, within the theme of this year, but also generally, I think in order for the acceleration of the action that we speak about, is all of us in our own worlds, in our workplaces, and even personally, I think it's really important that we challenge sometimes the status quo, push ourselves to the opportunities that perhaps we didn't think we should get or should be open to us. There's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't. It's the right person for the job. It's not about who you are, what your gender is. And really truly believe in that. The best example you can be is doing that for the people around you, and making sure that they see that the opportunities are there for them, and take people with you on the journey, whether they're male or female, showing them the opportunities that can take them into leadership roles. But we all must, I suppose, keep challenging those moments where things maybe seem a little bit unjust or indifferent in some ways, and making sure we make the action and realize that the small changes that we ourselves can make in our everyday lives with small decisions could actually impact greater than what we truly believe.
Yeah, thank you. I think I just echo the sentiment from Beck around those that have come online. Hopefully there's been something useful for everyone to take away. I think I'll build upon the conversation we had around mentoring or leadership, and you know, as a piece of action, you know, maybe from this webinar, is to just have a think about, you know, are there some people that you could reach out to, and then that's either, as I say, as a mentor or a mentee, in order just to have a chat about where you're at in your career and you know, opportunities. So it's not a piece of advice so much, but just to think about, there's probably a lot of people that would be really happy to help and support you. And if there are things that you're looking for, or you just want to develop some relationships, maybe is to write a list and reach out. And if you can, I think if you can grow your network and grow your connections, but also have someone independent sometimes that can be the voice of reason that you might need to hear in a situation. Yeah, if that's one thing to take out, I'd say just do it.
Great advice. And I think you said earlier, people genuinely want to help, and that's been my experience as well. Whenever I've reached out, people are pretty happy to do that. So I think, you know, looking through, I took a bunch of notes today, so I've learned a lot from both of you. So thank you for that. But the one thing that leapt out off the page for me was just about this kind of self-belief, pushing yourself forward. I think imposter syndrome is a thing we've, you know, many of us have experienced. I know I certainly have. And so that was another piece of advice, is just really pushing yourself forward and kind of testing your own thinking. And that mentor is a great way to do that, is to check back in and say, you know, am I really worthy of this opportunity? Is it just me that's got the negative talk going on? And often I think you find that it is just you. So, yeah. Thank you both very much for your time. Thank you for everyone who tuned in today. This will be available as a recording. So if any of your colleagues didn't have the chance today, please let them know that they can access the recording. Yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you both, Beck, Kath, for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks, Joel, and the team at VMA for setting it up. And thank you all for joining in today.
Thanks, Helen. You're wonderful. Thanks, Kath.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.